Hi there, thank you so much for clicking the thumbnail and being interested in my work. In this video I share with you my techniques and tips on how I achieve the clothes, so be sure to watch it right through till the end, because here and there I'll be slowing things down in real time so you can take a closer look. So let's dive in and take a look. So this is where we left off in part 2. So here's the pencils I'll be using for the underdrawing. The reason I do an underdrawing as well, so I can reshape the outline, because the outline's been done freehand, so I might have to make adjustments here and there. So when you start putting form in, like light and shade, things start to stand out more, and then I just alter things as I see them. But initially here I found that there were quite a few things what wasn't lined up correctly, so I just quickly changed what looked and felt better. So I'm finding pencils that are very similar colour and just putting them in very lightly as well. The reason being is to keep that tooth there, so when you put the subsequent layers on, the richer colours, it's got something to grab to. The deep shadows there, I'm using blue, ultramarine blue and burnt umber, just to get the depth there. Rather than using black, I'm using blue and brown. Basically, like I said, just getting things into shape. I'm not really concerned about the richness and the actual details at this point. All it is just getting the shapes correct and some form, or some sort of form there, so you can see where the shadows are and everything, but nothing accurate. It's just an idea for when I do place those rich colours on. Using the white to mix with this turquoisey blue colour to create that vibrancy. There's titanium white, the CarbOthello white, and it's a really great pencil to mix with colours. So I suggest getting one of those if you haven't got one in your kit. Right, just slowing things down a little now, just so you can see how I did this underdrawing in this area. I'm using a colour that is very similar to what I'm looking for, but then for the darker areas I'm using a warm blue. The reason it's warm, it's going towards the actual yellow, so it's a bit of blue with a bit of yellow in it, making it a turquoisey blue. The cold blue is like the ultramarine. So how I'm creating the shadows is mixing brown with that blue rather than orange. I know I normally say the complementary colour is for the shadows. It's very good to use that in subtle areas or mid-tones of blue, but when it comes to dark shadows of blue, the orange don't seem to do the trick, so you have to mix brown with it when you're using pastels. Now these are the pencils I'm using for the rich coat now, the next stage. So I've broken them up into two brands. The first one was Caran, then the CarbOthello, and they are Conte Paris. Now this is still a blocking stage, but it's more richer colours, and with this stage I try and get more the idea of the values to get that more accurate, and by placing those richer colours in. Now for the shadow of the white I'm using grey at this point. Reason being it's just a quicker way of doing it, so if you can get a grey which is very similar to what you're looking for, use that to start with, and then I'll go over like with a blue and orange and create greys with those two colours, which are complementary to each other, so they create subtle greys, but you get like an orangey grey or bluey grey, which when you actually look at the actual reference image you can see that some of the shadow is orangey, some is bluer, so that's why the blue and orange together works perfectly over the top of this grey that I'm putting as the foundation. If you're enjoying this video, why not subscribe? It's absolutely free, then you're sure not to miss any of my future videos. Now to achieve the highlights, I'm using Rembrandt white sticks. They're really rich in vibrancy and pigment. So to get that real brightness, I always put a bit of that in to get that sort of the value correct then, because it just changes everything when you get the whites right and the shadows right. Everything just seems to look more 3D then. What I tend to do then is to use other pencils to mix with that white pigment and just move it around. It's easier to shape than if you're using the pencils over this stick white from Rembrandt. It makes a difference, but you know, the real sharp points of light, you can always twist the Caran white. By twisting it will cling more to the pastel mat as well, because it's a sanded board, so that's always a good thing to do. Now I'm doing the same thing with the other colours, using that Rembrandt stick just to get the vividness I want, and then I'll mix now the pencil over the top, the Caran, and now that pigment, that vibrancy mixes in with the other pigment of the pencil, and it creates a nice sort of vivid but subtle highlight. Just want to take the opportunity now to thank all my Patreons for all your pledges each month. I really appreciate it. I can't thank you enough. It just really helps me to create this content for YouTube. If you're considering joining Patreon, please find the link in the description below where you can find all the details. Now I'm measuring up now for the Umbro logo, and it's basically just using the pencil on a vertical plane and horizontal to check the alignment of where it is. If you want to know more about how I do freehand, I've got loads of videos in my channel, so please take a look at those, but it's a similar sort of thing. It's just basically just comparing one measurement against the other. Now I'm using the CarbOthello white because this is an underdrawing, so I didn't want to make it too vivid, because it needs to, you know, if it needs to be changed I can easily change it. But to shape it I'm using a grey, which is very similar to what the actual colour of the pastel board is. So using the grey rather than using blue, because that will sort of mark the white, I'm using a grey to start with, just to shape everything up. Now I'm using two lines, one base line and one line on the top of the text, and then splitting it up into characters. So you try and look at the width of each character and then place a line down. That'll give you an idea of where to start to draw it. Then again, using the CarbOthello white, obviously make sure that a point is very sharp, and then just fill in then. So first of all you're just making boxes for those character widths and then just filling in the shape, but then you've got the actual direction of that baseline and the type height. And I'm hardly putting any pressure at all on that white pencil, because I don't want to fill that tooth up too much, because obviously I've got to go over more with the vivider white later on. Now doing exactly the same sort of thing and measuring, same principle as what with the Umbro logo. This is the actual Derby County Football Club logo, which is a ram. This is Derby County Rams. Now I've left the footage in of me drawing it incorrectly, so you could see how I moved it and what I used. See, that's a putty rubber or kneaded eraser. Really good for using on pastel mat because it don't damage the surface at all. So I suggest getting one of those in your kit. I've left a list of materials in the description below if you want to check that out afterwards. But it is really great to use. It don't mark or damage the surface at all. So I use the rubber actually a lot when I'm drawing freehand, because I mould things. It's almost like sculpturing the shapes on the actual board. I'll be lost without it. So I won't be able to just draw that freehand without using that rubber, because it just helps to get the shape formed. Here's the pencils I'll be using to sculpture that logo. That grey is actually a CarbOthello 706. It's exactly the same shade as what the pastel board is. So brilliant to use really when you're wanting to sort of shape things for the underdrawing. Went straight in with blue, then white. Then if I needed to move it, it'll just make a mess of that white. It'd make it into a light blue. So I wanted that white to be crisp. That's why I've used that grey. And this is an underdrawing, so it's a very sort of, you know, dull white, because I'm only putting a little pressure on that. So when I put the Caran dash white over the top of that, it really stands out. So this is just basic sort of foundation for what's going to happen later. Now onto the rib of the actual top. Now just laying in the foundations, the underdrawing, just using the ultramarine blues, light ultramarine and dark ultramarine blue, just to get the basic sort of structure together. With the actual name of Umbro on the zip, you just sort of trying to sort of see the actual words as a whole and try and get a feel for where it goes. Just little bits of points here and there, and just let it just flow from you, and you'll find it'll just fit in. It's strange how it works out. Some real time now, just to show you how I'm doing that ribbing. Now you don't have to do it exactly like it is on the reference image. It will drive you insane if you end up trying to count every little line and try and do every little rib the same amount. It's not about that. It's about making your interpretation. It's your interpretation of what you see. It's not an exact replica, because you might as well have a photograph blown up. So what I see is just get something very similar. It's all about the feeling, but if you get the values correct, no matter how loose your picture will look, it will look realistic if you get the values right. So it's the most important thing is getting your values, but what I'm doing here is getting the pattern of where these lie, and do a couple of lines with blue, then fill in with the white on the highlights. But again, this is just the underdrawing, so it's just preparing for the rich colours on top. Just enjoy the freedom of this underdrawing, because it's it's a loose stage, so it just makes everything relax when you start putting the further coats on. Now on the plain areas of the shirt, I've just laid a bit of pigment down just to make it easier for when I put the next coat on. There's nothing really, it's just putting pigment down so it flows better when you start getting it more sort of richer. These are the rich colours I'm using now. These are Caran dash pencils. Now these are CarbOthello ones, and these are Conte Paris ones. Now just wanted to tidy up where the neckline is, so I'm just using obviously the flesh colours now with that as well, just trying to tidy everything up. Just refining things now, just getting it more sharper, but it's still like a blocking stage in effect, because all you're doing really is trying to get those values more correct and a more of a richness about it, getting that thicker and deeper pigment in there. Now with the details on the zip fob there of the Umbro name, I don't really look at every little letter and try and draw it exact. I try and get like a feeling that it's like, it's hard to put in words really. Details seem to just happen. It's just a case of just keep moving it around until it starts to shape up. With the zip, there's quite a lot of details there that could drive you nuts if you let it, so just what I tend to do is just enjoy the spontaneity of it, just go with the flow and just put suggestions there. Like I said earlier, it's not about putting exact details, it's about getting the feeling and the energy right of what you're drawing. So just play and you'll find that it just comes together. Just be loose and sort of free flowing with it. To get the colour shade I'm wanting, I'm mixing about 3 or 4 different blues here just to get that shade. So it's a tendency to do that. You know, when you actually look at the reference image, there's all sorts of shimmering of different colours. So it's a case of just playing about with it until it seems right. But try and get the texture as well, because if you're not careful it'll look plasticky, so try and get a little bit of marking in there, because there's like the nap of the fabric, it's just getting that in and getting it to feel as though it is fabric rather than it looking plasticky. So it's like a skin's not smooth, the same with the fabric, there's different sort of marks and different shadow colours, so it's just a case of playing until you get it somewhat like. But you don't have to put every detail in there, and same with the actual stitching as well. Just make it look like stitching rather than trying to make it exact what the actual reference image is. If you're enjoying this video, why not give it a like and share it with your friends? It'll mean so much to me because this will help the channel to grow. Hope you've enjoyed this video and found it useful. Part 4 will be actually looking at how I select the backgrounds and how I do that on the computer, so be sure to watch out for that next week. Here's a look at the portrait so far at the correct angle, rather than being in perspective on the easel. If you would like to see more of my videos, here's some links you might be interested in.